Good morning. We can do better. Good morning. Perfect. My name is Barbara Kaufman. I'm a member of the board of the Senior Service America. On behalf of all of Senior Service America, I want to welcome you to the 2018 Force for the Future Conference. I'd like to acknowledge one of the other board members who are here, Bill Good, in the front. We on the board don't often get a chance to interact with you who run the program, so I would ask that you come up and talk to us, tell us what's going on in your site, what's going well, what's going badly, what you need from Senior Service America and the board. It'll make us better board members. It'll make the organization a better organization. So please take advantage and let us take advantage of being with you to learn something about what you're doing. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Gary Officer, the President and CEO of Senior Service America. Gary is a seasoned executive with over a decade and a half of leadership and organizational development in a variety of mission-driven organizations. Gary has served as President and Chief Executive Officer of Rebuilding Together, the nation's home ownership preservation, the largest home ownership preservation nonprofit and fourth largest remodeler. He grew Rebuilding Together into a $125 million organization within 6 years. He also served as president of the National Credit Union Foundation, where he successfully developed a $370 million community investment fund. He's also worked in affordable housing sector, where he served as president and CEO of Metropolitan Boston Housing Partnership and as director of asset management and Lakefront SRO Corporation in Chicago. He studied and has degrees from Manchester Metropolitan University and the London School of Economics, and has completed the prestigious Advanced Management Program at Oxford University. I'm pleased to, have Gary as the CEO of this organization and call him to the podium. Oh, there you are. Thank you. Good job. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Am I fully mic'd up? I am indeed. So let me, first of all, thank Barbara Kaufman and Bill Good for being here as board members of Senior Service America. I'd also want to recognize Christine Garland, who on the staff, who has worked so hard with her colleagues. Yes, please. To pull off what I hope will be an amazing conference experience for all of you. And also to you that have made the trek across the country. Some of you, for some of you, others, it's a 5-minute drive, but welcome. And I hope this conference will be an amazing experience of learning, of sharing, and of fellowship that you can take back to your communities. About 6 months ago, I attended a conference at Oxford. It's called the Skull World Forum. And this is it's often referred to as the Davos for the nonprofit space. It's really where the world's greatest philanthropists and nonprofit leaders meet, exchange ideas, and try to find solutions to the world's most pressing and most complex set of issues. So I go, in part, because this is an opportunity for me to blow through the gatekeepers, people who make important decisions, people who have access to enormous wealth and resources. But in a normal run of things, you can't get to them. But at these conferences, you blow past the gatekeeper. They're by themselves. So at this conference this year, I managed to sit in the audience and was completely spellbounded by a speech given by Brian Stevenson. Brian Stevenson is the president and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. And the Equal Justice Initiative is a Montgomery, Alabama-based organization that work to help folks who are on death row, and who are in death row because they were underrepresented in the legal system or who were basically innocent. And over the years, literally hundreds of individuals who were on death row and waiting for their meeting with their maker were exonerated because of the advocacy efforts of Brian and his excellent team. And in his speech at Oxford, Brian talked about proximity and what proximity means to him, and how proximity informs his work, how proximity informs his passion, and how proximity drives results. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing this, that as a result of his work and the proximity he shares to people in great need, people who are suffering, people who are underrepresented, and people who will ultimately perish because of the misdeeds of a justice system, that his proximity to his clients is what motivates him to represent them the way he does. Because in that proximity, he will then see the fear, the deep fear about what's coming next. In that proximity, he learns about their personal history and story, and the need for him to find ways to ensure that justice prevails for folks that he serves. And in many cases, all of you share that unique proximity, a proximity to your mission, a proximity to your programs, a proximity to your clients. So this presentation today is not about me telling you how to be more empathetic. It's not about me teaching or sharing ideas around how we can better meet the needs of our community. That's a given. The professional tenure you share collectively and the results you have accomplished over time is remarkable. So it's not a test around how we use proximity to be great professionals. What this is today and this week is a journey. It's a journey around CSEP, how we started, what are the threats, what are the opportunities, and how we take that to rethink, re-strategize, and reimagine what the future could look like. So follow me for the next 45 minutes through a journey, and may take a few questions on the back end. So CSEP as a program started within the Great Society movement. When I joined the staff about a year and a half ago, I had absolutely no background, no history, or no understanding of CSEP. And that's the first flaw I want to share with you. Everybody in the community development space should be as familiar about what CSEP is as they are about the Peace Corps, about the AmericaThe program. This program is the crown jewel in the Great Society movement. Why? Because two fundamental values that underpins our culture and our democracy is embedded in CSEP. First, community service. Community service is something that is sacred to our ideals because from the very beginning of this country, when folks were headed west for new opportunities and traveling through rough terrain, people had to rely on each other. And the American spirit around volunteerism, the American spirit around community service started in those wagons headed west. So community service is sacred to our ideals. Employment. this country has a fascination for employment and work that I have never witnessed throughout my life. You go to Europe in August, nobody's working. My European friends tell me I will never go to America. They work too hard. 2 weeks vacation in the US is seen as a privilege. In most countries, you start at 5 weeks. So we have a passion for work. Work is how we define ourselves. Work is how we measure our self-esteem. So work is, and employment is fundamental to our collective psyche. And CSEP captures both community service and it captures the essence of work. So Senior Service America was one of the first organizations selected under our predecessor organization to administer the CSEP program. And we were selected for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, Lyndon Johnson, in crafting the Great Society programs, had to create something that met the essential needs of his core constituents. And in his case, he wanted a program that would provide employment opportunities for essentially poor white widows living in rural communities. That's another thing to recognize, rural communities, because you represent an important political bloc in the current climate. I'll get back to that later. Hundreds of thousands, 750,000 low-income Americans, older Americans, have successfully transitioned into employment through the CSEP program since its origins. It's a pathway out of poverty. But as many of you know, the program is under threat. For the last 2 years, President Trump has zeroed out CSEP completely in the federal budget. Zeroed it out. For the last 2 years, we have successfully educated our congressional friends to restore CSEP to its full budget line. So we're funded from 2017, 2018, and we're fully funded in 2019. But the threat continues. I also want to say this. We celebrated last year the full funding of CSEP. We survived. But CSEP was one of several programs that was eliminated in the president's budget. CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant. Community Development Block Grant. AmericaThe, that service program capturing the enthusiasm of our nation's young people to engage in community service. AmericaThe, all slated for elimination. They were zeroed out in the president's budget, but in the final budget, each of those programs saw their funding levels increase. So while we were celebrating survival, they were celebrating an increased level of funding. What we have to do as a movement in the older workforce space is to be a lot more aggressive in articulating the inherent value of our programs to our lawmakers, so that in the budget process, these programs not only survive, but they thrive. And the next few slides, I will ask you all to pay very close attention, because it matters not just to CSEP, it matters to all of your programs. So CSEP is a proxy for a much larger conversation around issues that will affect all of us. At Senior Service America, we, as you can see, are extraordinarily reliant on CSEP as a revenue source that funds you, our sub-grantees across this nation. About 75% of our funding supports CSEP, and roughly 20% comes from our other programs. So we're heavily reliant as a balance sheet on CSEP. So if CSEP sneezes, we catch pneumonia. We have to adjust our business model. We scramble, like you guys do, to figure out how can we maintain a fully funded relationship with you guys. Oftentimes, we take the hit first. I'm not here today to offer a statement about trying to navigate future cuts. I'm here today to share with you my optimism around what is possible if we mobilize and engage our lawmakers. So we're heavily reliant on CSEP. Where CSEP goes, we go. But CSEP as a proxy is part of a larger set of issues that's unfolding in the federal budget system. Long-term growth in mandatory spending imperils funding for all our anti-poverty programs. And many of you, non-government, but many of you in the nonprofit space in the room today will note that you are almost 100% reliant on funding from your cities, your states, or from the federal government. In a budget environment of scarcity, that is a tremendous risk factor. Think about that. Look at this slide very carefully. We have a $4.3 trillion federal budget. Roughly $2.2 or $2.3 trillion of our federal budget goes towards what's called mandatory programs, mandatory commitments, things that by law we have to fund. And in the mandatory space in the blue, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, insurance subsidies, SNAPs, unemployment, go right through the list down to debt, which, by the way, is projected to increase by $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years, unless we are functioning as an economy at around 4.5% GDP. Almost impossible. Then the hard choice has become, how do you support your discretionary things that policy and political preferences dictate are the priorities for the remaining portion of our budget. So for the discretionary side of the budget, this year, $1.17 trillion. Do you get that? In 1965, mandatory spending in the blue accounted for 66%. I'm sorry, wrong colors. Mandatory spending, which should be red, accounted for roughly 34% of the federal budget. And 66% of total receipts funded discretionary activities. In 2016, 31% of the federal budget was on discretionary programs. 69% of the budget was funding discretionary programs. Look at 2040. As the national debt increases, as we run year-over-year deficits, as we age and become more reliant on the federal government, mandatory expenses will go from 69% today to roughly 81% by the year 2040. So we're functioning in an environment of diminishing resources. Only 20% of the pie in 2040 will fund discretionary programs. So the pool available to fund causes, programs that supports the needs of our poor and our vulnerable will decrease over time. And we have been faced with a very hard choice. Do we cut programs to balance the budget, or do we raise taxes? That's the choice we'll be confronted with as the future begins to unfold. And CSEP, as you can see, for the last 10 years, the CSEP budget line has also been squeezed year over year. In 2010, CSEP received in the federal budget line at the Department of Labor $825 million, boosted in part by the Obama stimulus. And in the years to follow, funding adjusted to its new realities. Today, CSEP is at $400 million, less than half of where it was in 2010, and roughly $100 million less than it was in 2011. It's trending downwards. I would also offer that many of your programs are likely to be on a similar trajectory. And if it's not, it's for a very simple reason. Your other programs have a political constituents that supports its existence and its funding levels. CSEP doesn't. So in an environment of scarcity, when lawmakers are deciding what are the priorities going forward, they will more likely yield to programs supported by constituents than they are to a program that they only hear about every 3 or 4 years when there's a threat. And for all the executives and executive directors in this room today, I encourage you, we have to build relationships with our federal lawmakers. I was in Alabama last week at a conference, the Alabama Association of Regional Councils, and I kept thinking, this is the state of Senator Richard Shelby. Richard Shelby chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. Not one person on his staff was present at the conference. Not one person. I'm not criticizing my good friends from Alabama, but I'm just emphasizing a point. Even if it's a courtesy invite, even if we went into his office in a district and asked for a briefing and got a low-level intern, that effort is noted. I pulled these numbers from a colleague of mine, a Republican budget director, but when I came to Senior Service America, I said, what's happening in the budget system that I should be aware of that will inform my strategy going in? We had lunch, and he walked me line by line through what was happening behind the scenes. We have to build relationships with folks on both sides of the aisle and do it quickly. So we are going through a challenging time on the budget side. But when we have threats around our existence, it forces us to dig deep, to be introspective, to think about our business model, and then reimagine what our future would look like. So we've gone through a process of doing that. I encourage all of you to do the same. If we are relying on 3 or 4 big programs in this environment, is that a realistic approach in running a cause-based organization in this climate? What approaches can we take? How do we realign our business? How do we squeeze funding to support marketing? How are we using our funding to develop a strategy around fundraising? And I'll get to that later. We're going to reimagine ourselves in an environment of scarcity and what our business model ought to be to not just survive, but to thrive. And that will require courage. It will also require innovation. I'll get back to that later. Last year, when CSEP was on the chopping blocks for elimination, we made a series of significant appeals to our own network to reach out to your congressmen, your senators, your mayors, to help us put together a letter-writing campaign that we hope will bring attention to the potential risk of losing CSEP in our communities. In Tennessee, we had every mayor in the state signed on to a letter. The congressional delegation in Alabama signed on to the letter. We met with Tad Cochran, and by the way, we cannot, I will stop here. We are not a lobbying organization, so we cannot lobby. What we can do, however, is educate. So when you meet with your lawmaker, you're not asking them specifically for something. What you're doing is using the nuances of language to emphasize the importance of and what it means for the community if this program were to disappear. So we're not lobbying. We want none of you to lose your 501c3 status by making a wrong move, but we can educate and talk about the merits of and the risk to and the need for enlightened thinking, all of which are coded words, by the way, that will persuade them to make the right decision. So we went through that process, and many of you came up to the mark and wrote letters. But that should be an ongoing process. Because the last thing a lawmaker wants to hear or see is someone who only shows up when their program is at risk. Invite them to your groundbreakers. Invite them to your graduation ceremonies for your participants. But invite them. Invite them to meet your board. Invite them for a meet and greet in the community that involves your organization being the anchor around which that forum was created. But invite them. And by having these relationships in place, when the program is threatened, you have a natural ally who will be there for you, not just for CSEP. CSEP is a proxy, but for all of your programs. Local engagement of your congressional delegations. Educate the public and leadership on CSEP. And use storytelling. I cannot tell you some of the amazing stories I've picked up sitting in front of you guys and your participants. CSEP saved me. I don't know what I would have done without CSEP. Met a lady in North Carolina last year. She came down from Ohio. She's a registered nurse, has a back injury. A back injury, cannot work on the floor for 8 hours a day. But she can do medical billing. There's work for her or a place for her in the workforce. CSEP isn't only about poor minorities. There are folks across the program, around the country, that have tremendous skills, who but for an injury, a bad experience, a bad marriage, a layoff, they were forced into a life of the gig economy, part-time job, until that dried up, and then CSEP came to the rescue. Tell their story. I was in Southern Illinois last year, ran into a lady who was a former government minister in Sierra Leone or Liberia. Came to the US after a military coup. Gary knows her, and she now works on the program. A CSEP participant, a government minister. And throughout the country, there are stories like that. Tell those stories of how this program has captured a population with innate skills who simply want to contribute back to their community, contribute towards their family, and participate as a fully fledged member of the American workforce. That's what CSEP represents. Tell the story. And at the national level too, we at the national level pulled together a national group of national CSEP intermediaries to begin to talk about among ourselves how we can formulate a national strategy nationally at the halls of Congress, through visits, through letters, and through outreach. So at the national level, we're also playing that game. And the result, as you know, is that CSEP has been fully funded for the last 2 years. We mobilized. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that we have had to do is to think deep about our business model, reimagine what the world will look like for us as an organization in an environment where funding is not secure, where tomorrow is not promised, and where funds can gradually decrease. We have to figure out, as an organization, how would we survive? And in making that adjustment in our thinking, we decided that we would be bold. So the board went through a strategic planning process, and out of that came 50 by 50 by 50. We will serve the plus 50 across all 50 states, and we will, over the next 5 years, and I emphasize the term seek, S-E-E-K, seek to generate at least half of our total income from a non-CSEP source. And I emphasize seek, because the presumption here to be successful is we need to have strong, willing local partners. No national funder will fund any national organization unless such an organization has a local network that can actually do the work. So our success will ultimately be your success. And I pledge that everything that is possible within Senior Service America will be employed to support that outcome. And we've had some successes. We brought in Shell in Houston to help support our CSEP program, non-federal funds that will support activities that ensures the success of our work in Houston. We formed a relationship with the Next 50 Initiative, which is a local philanthropy in Denver that supports workforce development for the ex-offender community. And Robert Andrews is here somewhere in the room from Denver Works. And we're looking at all the other federal agencies to see what are they doing, what are they seeking to fund, and how our funding, and how our business model aligns around their activities. We're looking, and we are being very aggressive. We've also discovered, while building that 50 by 50 by 50 platform, that in the older workforce space, we are surrounded by some extraordinary brands. AARP is a $2.5 billion a year entity. $2.5 billion a year in revenue. CSEP is a mere rounding error to them. They are not going to walk within the halls of Congress to advocate for CSEP, because in their minds they have bigger issues to present before our federal lawmakers. Catholic Charities and Goodwill are billion-dollar brands, and they do great work. And one of the tools you use in fundraising, the cooperative tool I always use, is you have to acknowledge the merits of your colleagues. And they all do fabulous work. But none of them provide any leadership when it comes to CSEP. The entire space is unoccupied. And those on the national side who are involved in CSEP are basically running the program. There's no op-eds, limited social media, nobody knows them. People will fund you and support you if they owe you or know you. All right? So this vast unoccupied space in the 50-plus workforce community is sitting there for leadership. And very subtly, we've sought to fill that gap. So our future is based around 50 by 50 by 50. What does it mean? Again, I said this before, 50 states, become a national leader in the workforce space, 50 plus, and create an income pipeline to support that vision. But you cannot build a fundraising strategy around funding existing business. You can't do that. You build a fundraising strategy around what's new, right? Where the gaps exist, and how you hope through your work, if you are a nonprofit, to adequately fill the gap. And we're seeking to fill the gap around the future of work. Something I've learned a lot about over the last couple of years. And many of you guys are aware of this emerging research and focus around the future of work. That's transforming the very nature of the global workforce, where the largest taxi company in the world do not own a single car. Uber, where the world's largest lodging company do not own a single piece of real estate. Yet next year, Uber will be going to an IPO. Uber's market value is projected to be $180 billion, larger than Choice Hotels, equal to Hilton. Uber is moving along. Airbnb. And with these changes forged by technology, there'll be changes in the way we think about work and the kinds of jobs that people of all ages will have available to them. That's serious. All at the same time when the US invests 0.35% of GDP on workforce training. 0.35% of GDP is spent on workforce training. That's according to the Aspen Institute on Aging. Other developed economies are spending upwards between 8% to 1% of GDP, 3 times the amount we are spending on workforce training. So we have to figure out a way where we fit into that conversation, because that conversation is driven by others in the workforce space who aren't necessarily looking at the aging community. Where do we fit? How do we tell the story, back to storytelling, of older workers and their inherent gifts and qualifications and character that makes them important contributors towards our economic success? How do we use storytelling, op-eds, tweets to spread the word that this community, a growing community, has value that we simply cannot ignore? How do we map out areas of the country that is experiencing different types of economic activity that will provide workforce opportunities for our older population? Understanding our region. If you're in Alabama, you've got Airbus, you've got Toyota, Mazda, you have Hyundai. What's the role of older people in Alabama? In a concentrated fashion. When we take those major employers out, 80% of the state's population, 80% of the state's jobs are located in rural communities. Once you back out those big employers, how do we find a place for older workers in that environment? That's the challenge. And we're going to find a solution to that challenge. So we launched Senior Service America Community Partners, a separate entity within Senior Service America. It's structured as a public-private partnership. We are going to seek funding from everywhere. If the funding is available and it fits our mission, we are competing for it. We cannot build an exclusive agenda around growth, around resiliency, and around innovation by funding our existing business. Embedded in the Senior Service America Community Partners will be an innovations lab. Why an innovations lab? I'll get to that later on the funding side, but that's where you test things out. That's where you seek funding for pilot initiatives, experimental programs, driven by geography and driven by need. And funded through us to be implemented by members of this room. We've reimagined our future. and we are raising outside dollars. When CSEP goes to the next round of review by the federal government, let's assume there's a 5% cut. I want to make sure as an organization that cut will never hurt Senior Service America. I want to make sure that any future cuts, if this plan goes to form, will not impact you. Can't promise you, but I want to make sure that if we seek to grow aggressively, we will become less threatened by where the federal government budget squeeze will hit us. $18 million funding pipeline, and importantly, we have maintained a clean audit. And a clean audit for a nonprofit is the gold standard. A clean audit and a 4-star rating on Charity Navigator is the first place a funder will go to after your website to find out, who are you guys? I've never heard of you. That will change. But who are you guys? Website, your 990, clean audit, and your Charity Navigator rating. We have that covered. And so, by the way, have you. So in the strategy, we have 4 key steps. First, maintain our existing program and redevelop our infrastructure as an organization. We've done that. Year 1, year 2, diversify our federal grants and contracts. Yes, it remains our strength. We will pursue private funding, but we're also going to make sure that all the other agencies that have funding that may align around our mission, we will pursue. And importantly, this year, we are developing extensive relationships with our friends in the corporate and foundation community. Midterm, year 2 to 3, attract grants. Establish ongoing non-federal projects. And the journey has already begun. And long-term, year 4 to 5, lead a large national network across all 50 states and turn that vision into a reality so we can serve more people who will be in need as they age. That is the plan. I talked earlier about automation, some key findings. Automation is a global force that will transform economies and the workforce going forward. According to the Institute of Politics and the Economy, roughly 30% of all jobs currently performed by low and or middle-income Americans will be automated over the next 15 years. Innovation starts in Silicon Valley, and like a wind, it blows through the country. 30% of all jobs currently performed by low-income Americans will disappear. Tellers, cashiers, drivers. By the year 2020, Ford have said, I heard them talk about this, they will have driverless cars on the road by 2020. Amazon has a store that they are testing out in Seattle that has no tellers and no staff. Cashiers and or staff. You walk in, you pick your groceries or your products, you walk out, and somehow, somewhere, something is picking up your credit card. A store without staff. You go to any supermarket across the nation today, you find more machines than you find staff, tellers, at the very front. That's the reality. 60% of all occupations across the board have at least a 30% chance of their activities that will be automated. And routine activities are most likely to be automated. Astounding. And this conference, in part, is driven by a need for us to recognize that automation is coming, and also automation is here. And several of our sessions you'll be attending will speak specifically to the impact of automation on the workforce. We must help companies unlock the world's fastest growing and often misunderstood market, the boomers. The longevity economy in this nation is essentially an $8 trillion economy. $8 trillion supports the 50+ in this nation. And that's according to Joseph Coughlin, who runs the MIT Lab on Aging. In Europe, they call this the silver economy. According to Merrill Lynch, the European silver economy would be the 4th largest economy by itself in the world. In the US, there are over 100 million jobs tied to the 50+ demographic, supporting $4.5 trillion in wages and salaries. But there is also hope. When I came to Senior Service America, one of the things I concluded was we are entering the new golden age of philanthropy. I'll be really slow as we progress through these slides, because funding and financing your vision will come from this source. I'll start from the top. According to Giving USA, which releases an annual study on philanthropy every year in partnership with the University of Indiana Institute on Philanthropy, individual giving in the US will increase from $350 billion in 2016 to $380 billion as a result of President Trump's proposed tax cuts. Corporate giving will exceed over $25 billion within 3 years. And according to the independent sector, endowments will increase year over year by roughly 10 to 15%. So the Ford Foundation went from 11.6 to 13.5 in the size of their endowments, of its endowment, which means their grant-making authority has increased. And the smart nonprofits have figured out, as the resources increase in the philanthropy space, the important question is, how do we position ourselves? And how do we make aging and workforce development issues a key activity that philanthropy will fund? Roughly 2.5% of philanthropy or philanthropic grant making occurs within the aging community. And some will argue that's because philanthropy don't really care about aging. That's not the case. We haven't shown up. We have not shown up. We haven't started the relationships, submitted proposals, accepted the denials, taken on board the feedback, innovate, fill the gaps, demonstrate value. There's no way we are going to break into the foundation community or philanthropy if we cannot demonstrate inherent value. Our goal is to provide, through this conference and through other platforms in your community, at least a pathway into private philanthropy. And last year, for the very first time in our nation, philanthropy exceeded $410 billion a year. So while we are looking at government, our colleagues in the broader workforce community, in the microfinance community, in the homelessness community, in the housing community, while we're focusing on government, they're focusing on partnerships, right? They're talking to employers. They're going to their chambers of commerce and delivering presentations around their mission and how their mission informs the community and how their work engenders a different kind of a community experience for all residents. That's what they're doing. They're looking outwards. We have to do the same. This is super important, so please follow me on this one, okay? I'll get over here. Can you all see it? So last year, $410 billion went out in philanthropy. Let me walk you through this slide so you can see what it really means for you. Individual giving represented 70% of philanthropic activity in this country. Increased by 5.2% over the previous year. Individual philanthropy is local. People give to their churches, places of worship, synagogues, mosques, hospitals, museums. People give local. But in the increase in individual giving, there's a backstory. And the backstory is this. In 2015, roughly 2.6% of gross income, 2.6% of gross income was used by individuals to fund their charitable giving. In real terms, that number dropped to roughly 2%. But you see on my chart, individual giving went up because of people like Mark and Chan Zuckerberg, people like Warren Buffett, people like Bill Gates. It's the new wealth community. It's uber wealth that's driving the larger number around the scale of individual philanthropy in this country. But rich folks tend to give local in every pocket, every corner of this country. We've got to find them, we've got to engage them, and we've got to seek their support. Foundations. Foundation philanthropy represents 16% of total giving activity, or $66 billion. Increased by 6% in 2016. What does that mean? Well, in the foundation community, the majority of foundations in this country are called community foundations. They are in every community in your country. Chicago has the Chicago Community Trust, $1.3 billion. The New York Trust, $2 billion. The Silicon Valley Community Foundation, $13.2 billion, fueled by tech money. But you have places in North Carolina and in Alabama that have small community foundations or small family foundations. Assets of around $75 to $100 million. But for them, a grant to you of $25,000 can make or break your ability to maintain a program, right? So engaging our community foundation who represent the base around which the foundation community operates is something I would encourage you all to do. Giving by bequest, that's like those, like the universities and other institutions of learning, museums, where a rich person will write a big check from their estate to fund a few things they care about. That one's a little bit harder. And corporate giving. My friends, that's the easiest. That's the easiest. So let's say in my new favorite state of Alabama, my good friends are here, right? You have all these companies coming into the state. Car manufacturers, Airbus, Toyota. And they bring all these executives with them. And they are told before they get here, one of the things you have to do in America is to serve on nonprofit boards. And the smart nonprofits are already teeing up their approach to these new companies coming to their towns. So you get a VP of something, a great guy from Germany, comes into town, sits on your board, and then, or your advisory board. And then you have an annual fundraising effort to bring outside funds into your agency. His employer will be the first group to write that check, because philanthropy in the corporate community follows the individual. And then he will then ask two of his friends that he met in the community, you funded me and I fund you. And all of a sudden, you got $75,000 from 4 people. So to innovate doesn't require a huge amount of money. It requires resources simply to get you started. And once you've started and you've built the relationship and can demonstrate results, that's when you start placing the big asks. Right? So corporations are useful for raising what I call go-away money. And go-away money basically is this. When I ran a foundation years ago, I had authority to spend up to $2.5 million. So if I met someone who walked in, nice person, enthusiastic person, great mission, but they just don't have the infrastructure or the bandwidth for a huge grant, I would say, take this, $25,000. And most corporations have the authority to issue what I refer to as go-away money. And I will see you next year. Then you have corporations for whom engaging you locally is important for their business. They want to be viewed as good corporate citizens. So they'll sponsor you or your organization for a dinner or for a program or whatever, $50,000. And then you have, in the realm of corporate philanthropy, the foundations. Write this down. Many corporate foundations will set aside between 1.15 and 1.25% of their gross pre-tax earnings. Between 1.15 and 1.25% of gross pre-tax earnings. So I'll pick on Rhode Island. I'm going north now. Last year I was in Fall River, and I was being extraordinarily nice people, great town, but a town that's struggling to embark on a full recovery, although it's making progress. And I was enthusiastically told by my wonderful colleagues, one of whom is in the room, that Gary, we have a partnership with CBS. And I'm waiting for the dinger. They promised to employ a few of our people. I'm like, employ a few of our people. CBS is a Fortune 200 company. CVS is about to engage in a mega merger. CVS are used to being asked for money. So you're asking for jobs that already exist. It should be $100,000 into your program to help a corner of the state that's suffering unlike any other in New England for help. And that help will be funded by CVS. And we will write an op-ed once a year showcasing CVS as an enlightened corporate citizen. And they'll see their name in the paper. And their marketing person will then run the analytics. How many eyeballs saw that op-ed? And they can then equate a marketing value to the number of eyeballs that saw that op-ed. It becomes equivalent advertising. And at the same time, you're demonstrating value to them by helping a community that's in need. So the answer for us as we engage our partners, it's not about looking for a job. I'll get to that in a second. It's about how do we build the nexus between what a company's looking for and what we're looking to accomplish in our community. And that's how you engage corporations. Then you have companies that, for reputational reasons, have to spend big. So last week, Wells Fargo announced a $1.5 billion commitment to Washington, D.C. Why? Because 2 years ago, Wells Fargo lost their CEO due to a controversy, well, no, I'll be blunt, illegal practices around these fake bank accounts that drove up their market value. So on Capitol Hill, they're taking heat. They're on their second CEO, and they pledged $1.5 billion to two of the poorest communities in Washington, D.C. A day after the announcement, two of their vice chairs were placed on indefinite suspension because of the ongoing federal probe. So I saw this, I'm like, wow, Wells Fargo. I'm like, I know Mike Reiser. He and I are on a board together. Mike Reiser is executive VP for all their philanthropy. So on Friday, I emailed him, Mike, long time no see. This is Gary Officer, how you doing? I'm sure lots of new old friends are coming back into the fold. Count me among them. I would love to see you. I got an email last night from Mike Reiser. It's a new commitment, Gary. We are looking at multiple partners. It's great to be re-engaged. And when I'm back in DC on one of my trips, let's talk. Because we haven't decided yet who our partners are going to be. Because oftentimes behind the announcement, the details have yet to be fully worked out. So hopefully Mike will give me, I will follow up, thank him after the session, and we'll get together. But my point is this. We have to understand that when companies, for reputational reasons, are going through a crisis, one of the guarantees, particularly for the larger company, is they want to spend their way back into acceptance. JP Morgan has been spending hundreds of millions of dollars the last few years because 3 years ago, they had a huge scandal in their London office because of irregularities around their trading. They announced last year a $40 million Chicago announcement around workforce development. They were the largest private philanthropist in the effort to rebuild Detroit. On the small business side, they're going gangbusters in low and moderate income communities. They're spending their way back into acceptance. So tracking companies based on where they are in a reputational space that's important. Having a few relationships with these guys, that matters even more. And fortunately for us, there are very few people I would not know how to get hold of. Either through past board work or people I know, we can find them. My issue is not going to be access. My issue is going to be, what do I ask for? Right? Am I seeking funding for innovators, or am I seeking funding for compliance experts? We are great at compliance. We are great at clean audits. We're great at running the program. But how much do we know about our broader community? How much do we know about our peers in the broader nonprofit space? How much do we know about trends in local philanthropy? How much do we know about reimagining how an organization can survive and thrive in an environment of scarcity? Should we be going to our boards or to our mayors and asked to create a different kind of organizational model, a separate 501c3, that will enable us to fundraise actively? Baltimore has 2 foundations that have a combined endowment of like $5 billion, the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the Weinberg Foundation. Charlotte has one of the largest United Ways in the country. And they have Bank of America down the street. Then they have Lowe's and United Technologies all there. There's no shortage of private resources. But are we going to be a program-driven network, or are we going to be an innovator around things that we aren't doing, but it's tied to the workforce needs of the future? I think we can be the latter. Where do we give? All to see. Religious organizations, education, human services, the works. They've shown up. We will be showing up. My friends, we can sink or we can swim. We have decided to swim. And we are going in big. And we will be bold. And as I think about being bold, I think too of Marian Wright Edelman, who along with her husband, Richard Edelman, were 2 of the crusaders in the anti-poverty movement back in the 1960s, who worked closely with Robert Kennedy. Richard Edelman went on to co-found the Public Welfare Foundation in Washington, D.C. on U Street. And Marian Wright Edelman founded the Children's Defense Fund. And there's a quote that I like to use that tells me a lot about how we think about not just the present, but about the future in times of uncertainty. And Marian said to an audience of young leaders, and I quote here, "Everybody keeps asking me, when are we going to have or see the return of Mahatma Gandhi or Dr. Martin Luther King? They're gone," she said. "They're gone. And they're not coming back. The future is now. The future is you. And the future is us." Right? So for this movement to gain traction, for us to take the lessons of CSEP and fold it into a broader ecosystem of workforce development, thinking, and practitioners tied to opportunities, the future starts now. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I want to share with you something special. And many of you have been following me on Twitter, which I do appreciate, by the way. We tell the story of Senior Service America and aging through these social media platforms. And now we have transitioned into not just social media, but we're using visuals and videos to help put a face to the story and a face to our mission. For the next 5 minutes, we will show you a video that we are showcasing today that captures the essence of where we are as an organization and where we hope to go.
I'd been unemployed for quite a little while, and I was not having any luck. I had background in office settings for many years. I could not get even a call back.
I had acquired a Class A CDL license. Couldn't find a job anywhere. Like, wait a minute, I've got all this experience and this, that, and the other.
A lot of places you go to nowadays, and you go there at 66, 67 years old, they ain't gonna hire you. But if they know you coming from CSAP, they know you've been steady, they know you'll keep working constantly. It's like a life support system at my time of need.
We have to recognize the value of our nation's longevity economy. Those are individuals who are 50 and over who contribute almost $8 trillion towards GDP. They represent people who've had careers or actively engaged in the workforce. We've got to find ways of recognizing their value and respecting their value as Americans who are critical to our national economic self-interest.
I graduated from Coppin State University in 1998 and immediately became a teacher. I worked until I got laid off. I didn't have a job for about a year. And then all of a sudden, I got into the CSAP program, which is one of the most wonderful things that I've ever done in my life.
I think it's important for our students to see that all different types of people are a part of the college community. She had a wealth of experience, and I think that's something that we're looking for, somebody who brings experience not just in qualifications, but also life experience.
I really like her because she's really easy to relate to and talk to, considering that she's a lot older. She has children, she has grandchildren. We talked about the civil rights movement. She's like, well, I was there with my grandmother and mother. Like, it's really cool to think about.
Denver Works has partnered with Senior Service America and the Next 50 initiative through the Back to Business program. Our Back to Business program is targeted towards folks that are 50 and older who have a background to put them back to work.
I figured my skills alone in the past would be good enough to get me wherever I need. I applied everywhere, but through Denver Works, I was able to find felon-friendly employment. Now I'm at the city and county of Denver, which I never thought was possible.
We are able to assist in doing some leadership and customer service training. The training focuses a lot on getting updated resumes, being a little more enthusiastic at the interview, dressing appropriately.
Second chances are very important because we are all human and we all make mistakes. Just to be able to go to work and be engaged with other people, kind of gives you a sense of belonging.
Veterans have served their whole life for the country, and they don't often have the same opportunity in employment. Martin Sanders, when he started our program, he felt a lot of challenges about computer training and how to get started.
The Maryland Access Point is really the starting point for information and resources about services and programs for older adults. Martin is in charge of the Loan Closet, which provides loans to older adults in Baltimore County. He manages the inventory, he accepts donations, he connects people with the equipment.
I got to the CSAP program and they gave me an opportunity to learn a lot of things. There's a lot of things I didn't know before as far as computers. Then I have always been the type of person that liked to help people, and I was put into a situation where I could help people, and it's been beautiful.
It would be so hard to do anything without having this chance to show that we're contributing members of society, not to be thrown away and ignored. We have a lot to give.
I can tell you that we are the most valuable asset, not just for the willingness to work, but the ability to be able to show and to share the younger generation a work ethic that is unparalleled.
When you have people in a program who always encourage you and always help you, this is the end result. They become successful. They get what they go for.
To have people that believe in you and allow you to express yourself through something that you are passionate for is worth more than money itself.
Senior Services America is better and different because of the people, because of their programs, because of their compassion. They've always had the individual first. Whether it's an older worker, whether it's a veteran, an ex-offender, they are not stuck in some old time warp. They're thinking ahead, they're looking around the corner, and I think the net result is great.
How do we make sure that as a workforce movement, we are reflecting a society, reflecting an economy, reflecting a community for whom being left out has been such a normal experience for them? How do we find ways to innovate and make sure we're leveraging the talents across our communities to ensure the aspiration of folks that we serve can be met through partnerships, through collaborations, and through innovation? That's what we are about here at Senior Service America. Hey. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope that this conference is going to be a truly extraordinary experience of fellowship, of new information, and of learning that we'll take back to our communities. That video concludes the morning session, and we'll start the breakouts very shortly. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Thank you.